The rain had been falling for the better part of an hour when the carriage turned through Hartmere's iron gates, and Dorothea Vane pressed her fingers briefly to the locket at her throat, as she had always done when she was uncertain whether the world ahead would be kind. It was a small thing, the locket. Gold, worn smooth at the clasp, on a chain so fine it caught in the light only when she moved. She had worn it every day for 7 years, without removing it. She wore it now. She did not see him immediately. She was watching the house come into view through the rain-blurred glass, all pale stone and tall windows, the gravel drive still dark with water, and she was thinking of Cecily as she always thought of Cecily when arriving somewhere new, wondering whether her old friend would have approved of this particular house, this particular October, this particular risk. The carriage lurched to a stop. The footman appeared with an umbrella. Dorothea gathered her traveling bag and stepped down. It was when she looked up to find her footing on the wet step that she saw the figure in the tall window to the left of the entrance. A man, standing very still, watching the drive. Dark coat, a face she knew from 7 years ago, though 7 years had cut it harder and given it less patience. He was looking directly at her. Or rather, Dorothea understood a moment later, he was looking at the locket, which the movement of her descent had brought briefly free from her collar and into plain view. The Duke of Marvel had a way of going still that was different from ordinary stillness. He did not go blank. He went concentrated, the way stone concentrates the cold. She had seen it only once before, and she had been standing at the foot of Cecily's bed when she saw it. And she had not forgotten. He turned from the window before she reached the door. If you find yourself moved by a story like this one, perhaps stay a little longer. The autumn house party at Hartmere Park had been Lady Philippa Aldwick's idea, planned over the preceding summer with the enthusiasm of a woman determined to re-enter the world after 4 years of widowhood, and Dorothea had been engaged as her companion for the occasion. Philippa was warm and quick, and required almost nothing in the way of companionship. Beyond a willing listener, and someone sensible to walk beside her when the conversation at table grew dull. She had written to Dorothea in August with the invitation, and Dorothea had accepted, telling herself the same thing she always told herself when something frightened her, that the promise she had kept for 7 years was not something to be frightened of. It was simply a thing she carried. She had carried it long enough that it felt like part of her body. The locket had been Cecily's own, a gift from her mother. And what it contained Dorothea had never opened to see, because Cecily had told her only this in those last weeks, that it held something James needed to receive when he was ready to receive it. That he was not ready yet. That Dorothea would know when the time came. "Do not give it to him out of obligation," Cecily had said, her voice by then very thin, only out of understanding. "He has sealed something inside himself that he does not know how to unseal. And when you see that he can bear it, you will know." Dorothea had been 23 years old. She had not understood entirely what was meant. She had simply promised and kissed Cecily's hand, and worn the locket from that morning forward. 7 years was a long time to carry something, without knowing what it was. She had come close, once or twice, to opening it. The temptation had been strongest in the first year, when the grief was sharpest, and the promise still felt provisional, as though she might wake one morning and decide she had misheard. She had not opened it. The promise had been specific. She was a woman who kept specific promises. In the years that followed, she had told herself she was waiting for a sign from him, some evidence that the sealed man had found his way back to himself. She had followed, from a careful distance, the ordinary facts of his life. He had gone abroad for a year. He had come back. He had begun to appear again in the papers as attending this dinner or that parliamentary session. None of it was the sign she was waiting for, And she had begun in the second year, and then the third, and then quietly in every year after, to wonder whether the sign would come at all, or whether she was simply a woman who had been given an impossible commission by someone she had loved past all proportion, and who was now condemned to carry it indefinitely, the way certain women carry letters that have never been sent. She had chosen to come to Hartmere because Philippa asked her, and because she trusted Philippa, and because she had told herself it was not the same as seeking him out. She had not sought him out. She had merely accepted an invitation to the house where he lived. In the autumn, wearing the locket he did not know existed, and she had prepared herself for nothing in particular. The house party assembled gradually over the first 2 days of Dorothea's arrival, carriages depositing guests at intervals through the gray October afternoons. She was introduced into the company as Miss Vane, Lady Philippa's companion, and was treated with the particular form of courtesy extended to women of good birth and insufficient fortune, which is to say, she was acknowledged and then organized around. The drawing-room sorted its inhabitants efficiently. Lady Sophronia Chettle, 26, and possessed of diamonds at her throat, and a manner at once warm and precisely calculating, occupied the chair nearest the fire, with the ease of a woman who had been told since childhood that she was the correct choice. She was beautiful in the way the season produced its diamonds, bright, faceted, and accustomed to catching the light. Lady Helena Aldwych, the Duke's mother, moved through the assembled company on the first evening with the unhurried authority of a woman who had run Hartmere for 30 years before her son came of age, and who still understood the rooms better than anyone else in them. She paused at Dorothea's elbow near the window and inclined her head. "Miss Vane," she said, "Philippa speaks well of you." Lady Aldwych. Dorothea received the greeting without flinching, which took a small but genuine effort, because Lady Helena's eyes had gone to the locket the instant she drew close. "I understand you were companion to the late Duchess." The words were even, neither warm nor cold. "A sad season that. James has put it quite behind him now." She paused for one measured beat. "It does us all good to put things behind us." Later, when the company had dispersed toward cards and Philippa's daughter Beatrice had been taken up to bed by her nurse, Dorothea stood near the door to the hall and heard Lady Helena say to Lady Sophronia, in a voice calculated to travel exactly as far as was useful, that the widow's little companion was devotion made habit. She was sure Miss Vane had served Cecily faithfully, Lady Helena said. But faithfulness at that age, to the dead, had a way of becoming a thing a woman carried past its season, rather than a thing she put down when it had served its purpose. Dorothea put nothing down. She went to her room, set her candle on the writing table, and put her hand to the locket, as she had done every night for 7 years. She did not yet understand what she was waiting for. She thought perhaps she had always known and had simply refused to name it. The Duke did not seek her out until the 3rd morning. She had been aware of him at every meal, at every evening gathering in the drawing-room, in the way one is aware of weather coming from a particular direction. He sat at the head of the table and conducted the conversation there with the minimum expenditure of effort that authority permits, and that other people interpret as formality. He did not look at her across the table. He was precise in his avoidance in the way a man is precise about a thing that requires precision. She was reading in the morning room when he came. She heard his step in the hall before the door opened, and had enough time to set her book down and fold her hands before he was inside. "Miss Vane," he said. He closed the door. "Your Grace." He stood at the near edge of the carpet, hands at his sides. He was taller than she remembered. Or the room was smaller, or she was less accustomed to him than she had imagined. He looked at the locket. Then he looked at her face, as though recalibrating what he was dealing with. "That is Cecily's," he said. It was not a question. It was, Dorothea said. She gave it to me before she died. Something moved in his jaw. She had no right to give it away. She believed she did. Dorothea did not look away from him, which was not nothing, because the effort required was considerable. His eyes were not cold in the way she had told herself they were. They were controlled, which was different. Control was much harder to refuse than coldness. She gave it to me with a specific instruction, Your Grace, which I intend to fulfill at the appropriate time. And when, he said, his voice level, will that time be? When I am satisfied, you can bear what is in it. The silence that followed was long enough that the fire had time to shift. She watched him decide whether to be angry. He chose something else, which she could not name, and turned and left the room without another word. She exhaled for the first time in several minutes and picked up her book. Her hands were not entirely steady. She noted this and set it aside. He was at the window again that evening, and she had the brief, irrational thought that he spent a great deal of his life at windows, watching things approach that he did not know how to meet at the door. The week found its rhythm. Lady Sophronia walked with the Duke in the gardens each afternoon, accompanied by her mother and the implicit weight of 6 years of introduction and the Dowager's unmistakable preference. The house party arranged itself around this fact the way water arranges itself around a stone, and Dorothea was arranged around the periphery of the periphery, which was where she was comfortable and where she had spent the majority of her adult life. She performed the small duties that companionship required. She sat with Philippa at the writing table in the mornings and helped sort correspondence and address envelopes. She walked with Beatrice in the kitchen garden when the weather permitted. She took her place at the far end of whatever room she was in, and she listened, as she always listened, and she learned the shape of a household the way a careful woman learns it, through the quality of the silences between its inhabitants. At dinner on the 4th evening, the table conversation had turned, as dinner conversation at such parties always turned, to the question of who was acquainted with whom and by what degree of connection. Lady Sophronia, seated 3 chairs from Dorothea on the right side of the table, was speaking to Lady Philippa with the particular warmth she deployed toward people whose good opinion cost her something. She asked after Philippa's previous season and whether she had come to Hartmere with a large party. Only Miss Vane, Philippa said, who is excellent company and very dear to me. Lady Sophronia's smile remained precisely as warm as it had been. Of course, the widow's little companion. I believe my mother knew the late Duchess in passing. Such a loss. She turned back to the table with a grace that had no point of entry, no visible seam where the remark might be recognized as calculated. She meant it, Dorothea thought, at least in part. She was not wrong that it was a loss. She was only wrong about what the phrase contained. What she learned was this: the Duke of Marvel was a man who had organized his household against intrusion and who had maintained the organization so long that it had become invisible to him. He was not cruel to those who served him. He was not cold to those he loved. He simply kept a perimeter, and the perimeter was wide, and it had the effect of a kindness extended from a very great distance, felt but not quite reached. Philippa was a better companion than most, in that she did not require Dorothea to be decorative or amusing, and she had a quick eye for what was happening in a room. On the 4th afternoon she said, without particular ceremony, "James keeps watching you." "He is concerned about the locket," Dorothea said. "He is concerned about more than the locket, I think," Philippa said. "I know him better than he thinks I do. He watched you at dinner last night when you were talking to old Mr. Carew about his orchards. He had no practical reason to watch that conversation. He watched it for 10 minutes. Dorothea said nothing. "I will not press you," Philippa said. "I know you are a woman who keeps things until the right moment." Dorothea almost said that she was beginning to wonder whether she would recognize the right moment when it came. She did not say it. She was a woman who kept specific promises, but she was also, in the privacy of her chest where no one could see it, a woman who was tired. 7 years was a long time to carry something beautiful and terrible for someone who would not thank her for it. She had been companion to 3 households since Cecily's death. She had sat at the edge of other people's drawing rooms, walked at the side of other people's daughters, copied letters for women who could not abide the effort, and never once removed the locket. And the weight of it was not the weight of the gold, but the weight of the promise, which had grown heavier with each year. She did not resent the weight. She had chosen it. She resented only that she could not see its end. On the 5th night of the party, Philippa's daughter Beatrice woke with a fever dream at 2 a.m. and screamed so loudly that the sound reached Dorothea's room at the end of the hall before the nurse had made it from her own quarters. Dorothea was at the nursery door in her nightgown and a shawl before anyone else arrived, and she went in and sat on the edge of the child's bed and spoke to her in a low, clear voice while the nurse fumbled with a candle. Beatrice was 7 years old, and fierce in the way Philippa was fierce, and she was frightened by something in the dream that she could not entirely describe, only that a door had been closed in it, and someone she loved was on the wrong side. Dorothea smoothed the child's hair back from her face and said steadily that doors could be opened from both sides, and that the people we love do not disappear from us entirely, and that dreaming of a closed door was not the same as the door being closed. She said it without sentimentality, the way one states a true thing to a child who is intelligent enough to know the difference between comfort and truth. Beatrice gripped her hand for a moment, very hard, and then released it, and her breathing slowed. Dorothea became aware, some minutes after the nurse had settled at the far end of the room with a shawl and a candle, that she was no longer alone in the doorway. She had not heard him come. She did not look up. She kept her voice even and her hand on the child's forehead until the child was asleep. She was aware, in the way one is aware of a fire when one's back is to it, of the quality of the attention behind her, and she kept perfectly still within it. The Duke was gone from the doorway before she turned. She stood in the hall for a moment with her hand at the locket and the word she could not quite say inside her. She had not known he was awake. She had not known he was watching. She did not know what he had seen, but she thought that whatever it was something closer to the truth of her than she had offered anyone in 7 years. She stood there in the dark corridor with the cold stone floor under her bare feet and felt, for the first time in a long while, something she did not have a name for and did not entirely want to name. She went back to her room and did not sleep for a long time. If this story has moved you at all, you are welcome to remain and to tell someone you think might need it. The summons to the library came on the 6th morning, delivered through a footman with the formality of a state communication and the brevity of a man who did not trust himself to write at length. Miss Vane, the library, 10:30. It was signed with his initial only. The library at Hartmere was long and high-ceilinged, with windows at the south end that looked onto the kitchen gardens and shelves that ran from floor to ceiling on 3 walls, the kind of room that had been accumulating books since before either of them was born. A pair of wingback chairs sat before the fireplace, angled toward each other at the distance 2 people might occupy who intended to speak honestly. He was standing at the window when she arrived. He did not turn immediately. She closed the door behind her and waited. "Sit down," he said. not unkindly. She sat. He turned then. She saw that he had been standing there for some time, the way a man stands when he has made a decision he does not entirely trust himself to hold. He came to the chair opposite her and sat and looked at her for a moment, with an expression she was beginning to recognize. Not coldness, not anger, but the specific look of a man who has been alone with something too large for too long, and who has chosen, this morning, to set the largeness down. "Miss Vane," he said. "She spoke of you. Cecily. In her letters. In the last months. Dorothea said nothing. She said you were the most faithful person she knew." He paused. "I did not entirely understand what she meant. I think now that she was telling me something I was not in a condition to hear." "She loved you," Dorothea said. "She was not trying to tell you anything against yourself. She was trying to give you something." He looked at the locket. The silence stretched, the kind of silence that has weight, and that neither person wishes to break carelessly. Then he said, "Open it." She had been waiting 7 years for the right moment, and she had imagined it differently in some accounting of the future she had conducted and then set aside many times. She had imagined it as a considered occasion, a deliberate conversation, a moment of mutual readiness. What she had not imagined was a man at a window who could not sleep watching her hold his dead wife's child through a nightmare, and something cracking open in him that had been sealed shut since before the grief had a name. She understood as she reached for the clasp that this was the moment all the same. Not a ceremony, not a prepared speech, simply the right door open. She opened the locket. Inside, in a setting no larger than her thumbnail, was the face of an infant. Painted in miniature, the brushwork so fine it could only have been done by someone sitting very close in very good light. The child's eyes were closed. The hands were folded. The painting had been made after death. She understood. And the painter had been very skilled, because the child looked only asleep, the way very new things look when they are at rest. She held it out to him. He looked at it for a long time without taking it. His face was entirely still, the stillness she had recognized at the window in the first moment, and which she now understood was not coldness at all. It was the particular quality of a man holding himself together by deliberate force, the way one holds a thing that might otherwise break. She watched him put his hand out, and then not take it. And then he covered his face with his hand, his elbow braced on the arm of the chair, and was very quiet for a moment. That Dorothea understood was not meant to be witnessed, and which she witnessed anyway, because she had promised Cecily she would be there when it happened, and she intended to keep that promise too. "We did not speak of him," he said when he had steadied. His voice was controlled, the control worn thin enough now that she could hear what was beneath it. "She wished to. I could not. I told myself that she needed me to be steady, and that speaking of him would undo us both. And so I said nothing, and she said nothing, and he became the thing we could not say." "She said his name to me," Dorothea said. "In the last weeks. Henry. She wanted you to know she did not blame you for the silence." He looked up. "She wanted you to know that she understood why you could not come into the room. She told me you went to the east window and stood there all night, and she found that she could bear it when she thought of you standing there, because she knew you were near, even though you could not come inside." The fire shifted in the grate. The autumn light through the library windows was thin and gray and kind. "She told you I was at the window," he said. "She saw you from her bed. She could see the east gable through the glass. She watched for the light of your candle." He said nothing for a moment. Then he reached out and took the locket from her hand very carefully the way one handles something that might not survive being held carelessly, and closed his fingers around it. "Henry," he said. It was the first time she had heard him say it. The word was very quiet, and it held everything in it. The whole sealed country of him. The years of silence. The window in the dark. She sat with him in the library until the light changed. She did not offer comfort in the form of words, because he did not need words, and she did not have the right kind. She simply remained, which was what she had always been best at, and which she had done for Cecily, and which felt now like the simplest and most honest thing she had ever done for anyone. She thought that Cecily had been right, as Cecily always was about the important things. He was ready. He had been ready for some time. He had simply needed the door opened from the other side. The last 2 days of the house party had a different quality than what came before, though nothing in the visible surface of things had changed. Lady Sophronia still sat nearest the fire. Lady Helena still presided at her end of the table. The Duke still conducted the table conversation with the minimum expenditure of effort. He looked at Dorothea differently, though, when he looked at her, and the quality of his looking was something she could not name and therefore could not entirely manage. She was aware of it at dinner, at the tea table in the afternoon, at the threshold of the drawing room when their paths coincided. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he has only recently understood is essential, and is recalculating how it became so without his noticing. Lady Helena noticed, because Lady Helena noticed everything. She arrived in Philippa's sitting room on the morning of the penultimate day, while Dorothea was helping Philippa sort through the correspondence that had accumulated over the fortnight. She did not trouble with preamble. "I have had a word with Philippa," she said, which was untrue. She was having the word now, with Philippa present as witness. "We are agreed that this gathering has perhaps been a little too much for Miss Vane. The journey home will be easiest if she departs tomorrow morning. I have asked Hargreaves to arrange the carriage." Philippa's chin came up. "I have not agreed to anything of the sort, Helena." "You agreed last evening," Lady Helena said, with a smile that did not waver, "that Miss Vane's time here had run its natural course." "I agreed that the party would conclude on Friday," Philippa said. "That is not the same thing." Lady Helena turned her attention to Dorothea. She was not cruel in this moment. She was something more difficult than cruel. She was certain. "You are an admirable young woman," she said, with complete sincerity. "You were loyal to Cecily, and whatever she told you in confidence, I have no doubt you carried it faithfully. James has been a different man these past 2 days, and I do not need to be told why. You have given him something, and I am grateful for it." She paused, and the pause was precise. And now the widow's little companion has done what she came to do, and the time has come to allow James to go forward. You understand this. I think you understand it better than anyone. Dorothea looked at her for a long moment. She thought about 7 years of morning rooms, and borrowed shawls and promises held like stones in the pocket of her chest. She thought about Cecily's hand in hers, and the weight of the locket, and the infant's painted face, and the Duke standing at the east window all night in the dark while his wife died on the other side of the wall. "I understand you believe what you are saying," Dorothea said. "I understand that you are protecting him as best you can, as you always have. I will go if he asks me to go." "He will not ask," Lady Helena said. "He will not ask because he is too proud and too tired, and because asking would be an admission, and it will fall to others to make the sensible arrangements, as it always does." She left. Philippa looked at Dorothea. Dorothea looked at the correspondence in her hands, and felt the weight of the locket at her throat, and thought that she had been carrying the Duke's grief for 7 years, and it had not broken her. And she did not think being asked to leave would break her either. She thought it would come very close, and the closeness of it surprised her, because she had not allowed herself until that moment to know how much she wanted to stay. She went to her room that evening and began to pack her traveling bag. She was folding the last of her plain gowns when Philippa knocked and came inside without waiting to be invited, which was very like Philippa, and said without preface, "James knows. I told him." Dorothea looked up. "Told him what?" "Precisely." "That Helena has arranged your departure for tomorrow morning. That she told you he needed to go forward." Philippa sat on the edge of the bed and folded her hands. "He did not say a great deal. But I have known my brother for 34 years, and I know what he looks like when he has decided something." "What he has decided," Dorothea said carefully, "is not something you should build expectations upon." "He went downstairs," Philippa said, "without his coat." The drawing room held perhaps 14 people that evening, a number sufficient to constitute an audience without being large enough to lose anyone in. Lady Sophronia was at the pianoforte, playing without particular commitment. Lady Helena was at the card table, her back to the door, her bearing as composed as ever. 3 or 4 of the gentlemen stood near the window with brandy glasses. Dorothea entered at the far end of the room and found a chair near the bookcase at the back, which was what she always did. The Duke arrived 7 minutes later. He was without his coat, as Philippa had said, in shirt sleeves and waistcoat, which was not improper, but was not the dress of a man who had prepared for an evening in company. He stood in the doorway for a moment with his hands quiet at his sides and looked across the room with the contained stillness she knew now not as coldness, but as attention, as gathering. Lady Helena had not yet turned. Lady Sophronia had stopped playing. He walked across the drawing room in 4 strides, which was not a long distance in an ordinary sense, but which in that particular room was a very long distance indeed, because every person in it watched him walk it and understood that it meant something before he had done or said anything at all. He stopped in front of Dorothea. She rose because one rose. He was closer than propriety required, close enough that she could see the precise quality of his expression, which was not the controlled thing she had come to expect. It was something beneath the control, something that had been there long enough to have earned the right to speak. She was aware of her own heartbeat in a way she had not been before, and of the particular quality of the air between them, charged and still, the way air is still before a storm decides which direction it will move. He took her hand. The room was entirely still. Lady Helena had turned. Lady Sophronia sat very upright at the pianoforte bench, her hands in her lap. "Your Grace," Dorothea said quietly, so that only he could hear. "Miss Vane." His voice was the same, level, unhurried, giving nothing away except by giving everything away. "I am told arrangements have been made for your departure tomorrow." "They have. I am canceling them," he said. Then he turned, still holding her hand, and addressed the room in a voice that carried without effort to every corner of it. "Miss Vane remains at Hartmere at my invitation. She is mine to protect, and I will not be corrected on this." 12 words. He had always been a man who spoke in the minimum necessary. Lady Helena's fan did not quite lower. Her hand hesitated for one visible moment before it continued its arc, and Dorothea, who had been watching for exactly this, saw it. The hesitation was small and swift, and it cost something. Lady Sophronia said nothing. The gentleman at the window with the brandy glass coughed briefly into his fist. Philippa, from the doorway, made a small sound that was barely distinguishable from a laugh, and was with some effort suppressed. Lady Helena recovered with a grace that Dorothea genuinely respected, inclining her head once, precisely, and turning back to her cards. She had recognized the line. She was not a woman who did not know when a verdict had been delivered. She was not wrong about everything. She was wrong about this. And she had the intelligence to recognize the error and the dignity to receive it without fragmentation. Dorothea found herself grateful for this, because it made the moment clean. Sophronia rose from the pianoforte bench with her back entirely straight and crossed to the refreshment table, where she poured herself a glass of wine and looked at the window and then at the middle distance, and finally, with a faint press of her lips that cost her something, at the floor. She was the correct choice. She had been told so her entire life, and she was not wrong about most things, and she would make someone a very fine wife. She understood, in the way intelligent women understand things they have not been told directly, that she was not the choice James Aldwych had made. The Duke did not release Dorothea's hand. She did not ask him to. He walked her out of the drawing room and into the hall, which was quieter, and stood with her beside the tall clock in the dimness. He looked at her in the particular way he had, that meant he was deciding something he had perhaps already decided, but was only now admitting to himself. "I owe you more than I can calculate," he said. "You owe me nothing," she said. "I made a promise to Cecily. You were not party to it." "I am party to it now." He looked at the locket, still at her throat. "She chose correctly. In you. She always chose correctly, and I did not always see it. But I see it now." Dorothea put her hand to the locket, as she had done 10,000 times, and then did something she had not done before. She unclasped it. The chain came free in her fingers, and she held it out to him. He shook his head, very slowly. "Keep it," he said. "It is yours. It has been yours for 7 years." "It was always hers," Dorothea said. "And then it was yours." "It was only in my keeping." He took it from her hand, the chain pooling in his palm, and looked down at it for a moment. Then he looked up at her with an expression that had no precedent in her experience of him, something open and deliberate, and not quite afraid of itself. "Stay," he said. It was one word, and it carried the weight of the man behind it. All that sealed country, all that steadiness he had kept intact through 7 years of his own particular grief, offered without ceremony. "I was not planning to leave," she said. Something moved across his face that was, she thought, the closest a man like James Aldwych came to a smile in the ordinary run of things. It was a small thing, and it was real. And she tucked it away in the part of her chest that had been occupied by other people's secrets for so long she had nearly forgotten it had belonged to her. The autumn at Hartmere had 3 more weeks to run, and by the time the first frost edged the kitchen garden and the party had dissolved back to its constituent carriages and its separate destinations, Miss Dorothea Vane had not departed. She walked with the Duke in the rose arbor in the gray mornings when the ground was hard and their breath was visible in the cold, at the distance propriety required, which grew smaller with each successive morning until it was not a distance at all. She read to Beatrice in the evenings, while Philippa wrote letters, and the child had taken to pressing her small, cold hand into Dorothea's palm when she was half asleep, which Dorothea received each time as though it were a gift. She had carried other people's secrets for a long time. She had carried other people's grief, and other people's promises, and another woman's locket at her throat for 7 years, without removing it. She had been the widow's little companion, and the faithful keeper, and the woman at the deathbed, and the woman in the morning room who did not flinch. All of it was true. None of it was entirely who she was. She learned who she was in the weeks that followed, in the evenings when the house was quiet, and the Duke came to find her in the library, and sat across from her, and did not speak much, and did not need to. He was a man who had learned that silence could be a country rather than a wall. She was a woman who had been fluent in silence for years. They understood each other in the way that people understand each other when they have been shaped by the same sorrow from different angles and have arrived, by separate routes, at the same still place. He asked her, on the first Sunday of November, in the library by the fire, with the locket laid on the mantelpiece between them, where they could both see it, whether she would remain at Hartmere. He asked her in the form of a question rather than a command, which cost him something, and she received the cost and did not make him wait for the answer. She would remain. The locket stayed on the mantel. She did not put it back on, and he did not ask her to, and it sat there in the firelight in the evenings. A small gold thing that had been faithful to its task for longer than either of them had known, and was now at rest. Sometimes Beatrice asked about it, and was told that it was very old and very dear, which satisfied her entirely, and she would touch it once with one small, careful finger, and then return to her book. Cecily had known, Dorothea thought, on the occasions when she allowed herself to think it. Cecily had known the way certain people know things they cannot entirely explain, through some sympathy of understanding that goes below the level of the sayable. She had given the locket to the right woman, and she had trusted the right woman to carry it to the right moment. And the moment had arrived, as moments always did, not with ceremony, but with a child's nightmare in the dark, and a door that could be opened from either side. Outside, the first snow of November was beginning to settle on the east garden, soft and without sound, covering the late leaves and the bare rose canes and the cold gravel of the drive where a woman had arrived in the rain 7 weeks before and looked up at a window and felt the weight of something she had carried for so long she had not entirely understood it was also love. The fire crackled. Dorothea looked at the locket on the mantel, gold in the firelight. She looked at the man across from her, who was reading now, his face quiet and legible in a way it had not been 7 weeks ago. The control that had been so complete it looked like coldness softened now into something she recognized as peace. She did not need to reach for the locket any longer. She was already home. If Dorothea's faithfulness has moved you tonight, leave your thoughts below and share this story with someone who knows what it is to carry something beautiful until the right moment arrives.